welcome to this edition of The Current. My name is Erin Curran. I am your host, and today we are speaking with and learning from Nan Cumming, who is the current director of the Portland Parks Conservancy, and who has also worked with the Maine Historical Society and Portland Trails. Nan, welcome to The Current.
Thank you so much, Erin. Great to be here.
I have so many questions for you, as I'm sure listeners do, hearing that you work for the Portland Parks Conservancy. Can you tell us a little bit about this organization?
Sure. We're relatively new, so if you haven't heard about us, that's okay. We were really just founded at the end of 2018, so I started as the first executive director in 2019. And really that first year was just getting ourselves going. And then of course COVID hit, so we changed direction a little bit, as many organizations did. But we were founded with the mission to support the public parks and recreational programs of Portland. So we work very closely with the city on public parks projects. But at the same time, we're a private nonprofit, so we have our own values, our own goals, which help us decide which of the city's many projects we want to get behind and really support.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm glad you mentioned that you're a relatively new foundation. I think the first question that would pop into folks' minds is, what isn't the city in charge of the city parks, And so it's helpful to hear that distinction. And I know that there's also organizations like Portland Trails and other nonprofit entities that support the outdoor spaces in Portland. Can you talk a little bit about how you work with them, or not?
Sure. Well, as you said, I was the director of Portland Trails for 12 plus years. So when I heard about this new nonprofit being formed, I was really curious how the Parks Conservancy planned to work with organizations like Portland Trails and the many friends groups. There are a lot of volunteer friends groups in Portland, how that was going to work, and how everyone was going to work in a spirit of cooperation and mutual support. And the more I started thinking about those issues myself, the more I thought, I think I would like that job. And so that's really what led me to apply for the job. But we are definitely working together. We really even communicate in terms of who's going to apply for what kind of funding. But we have different enough missions. We really work on the city's public parks, where Portland Trails, so many of the trails are not necessarily on city property. They're a land trust. They own or have easements on completely different areas and different land. Some of their trails that are on public property, but some of them aren't. And they wouldn't do like playground work or that kind of thing, which we have already embraced. So there are enough differences that I think we complement each other really well.
Yeah, I think this would be a great time to hop over together to the Portland Parks Conservancy website and just take a look here. For those who don't know, this is the portlandparksconservancy.org, what you land on. And can you talk a little bit about your current projects?
Sure. Our biggest project right now is Riverton Trolley Park. And I'll admit it was a passion project of mine throughout much of my career at Portland Trails and at Maine Historical. And now I'm able to really do a lot of fulfillment of it in this position. But Riverton Trolley Park is right on the Presumpscot River, right on the border between Portland and Westbrook off of 302. A hidden gem with amazing potential, as the website says. It's actually the site of what had been a Victorian era amusement park.
Right.
And so it's got a great history. And even beyond that, certainly its original use was Wabanaki fishing and foraging grounds. And it has an important history there. It's been a public park since 1947, but at this stage, it's just almost unknown and woefully underused. So we are doing some work, and you can see some of the plans that you've scrolled through there to really rejuvenate the park with new signage, a better entrance. There's a little league field there, which we plan some improvements on, better interpretive signage, a pollinator meadow, all kinds of new things that will bring the public there, even a mountain bike flow trail and skills area. And what we did was we started with a public process to ask the public, okay, what would attract you to use the park? And why aren't you using the park? And we had more than 300 people participate in our survey and public meetings. And we really learned a lot about what people want in the park. And so we're fulfilling their wishes, more or less. So it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, thank you for going into that one project. And it looked from the website like there were a few that folks could learn more about by perusing that. I love this idea of reaching out to the community and directly asking them what their desires are, what their hopes are. Can you talk a little bit about that role of the community in the Portland Parks Conservancy?
Sure. Public engagement is a strong part of our mission, and making sure that we're doing things that benefit the public and that, fulfill their wants for their public parks. So in this case, we gathered stakeholders, a lot of other nonprofits and community groups, and then did a couple of public meetings, issued our survey in 7 different languages because we really wanted to engage the new Mainers who especially live in that neighborhood. And so that was, because we're so new, that was really our first big public engagement effort. But I think it set the model for how we're going to work going forward. And I have to say, in some ways, we did it all through COVID. So we did it all online. And from what I'm hearing, especially from folks at the city, a lot of these online public forums are actually attracting more people than if you have to get a sitter and drive downtown and find a parking place and all of that. People are more easily able to attend. So that was an important lesson learned, and something that will probably continue going forward.
Yeah, and I love that this is one of these lessons from the pandemic that I think all organizations are learning, is like the surprises and how to engage more people and what mix of hybrid or purely online meetings might make it more accessible to more community members, to your point. Yeah, I want to switch gears a little bit now, and I have a question out of the blue for you. I wonder, when you were thinking back on your childhood, can you make any connections between your childhood and what you do now? It's sort of a question that broadens us out to look at you as a person, Nan. Are there any connections that come to mind?
Well, I definitely was always a history kid. My parents would take us. I did not grow up in Maine. I grew up in Michigan, but we came to Maine every summer and we travel around. And I was always the one who wanted to go see the historic fort or the historic house or that kind of thing. And my parents were not that into it. And they would take me. And I even remember a couple of times they'd pay for me to go in. When I got a little older, they'd pay for me to go in and they'd wait outside because they just weren't that excited about it. But I was that kind of kid that I just loved that. Um,
What do you think drew you to the history of a place? Was it books you'd read or your imagination?
I think a sort of romantic imagination as a kid. And the fact that you could step back in time a little bit in some of these places. Um, so that really drew me to the history part of my career. And I got my master's at the American and New England Studies program at USM, now defunct. But it was through some of that I actually started. I've always loved public parks. I've always loved camping and hiking and that kind of thing. But through my master's degree, I started to study more the outdoors, the history of the outdoors and how it became marketed to women during the Victorian era. And that was my master's thesis. And so I started looking at it intellectually. And that, in fact, is what drew me towards moving from my original job in Maine, which was at Maine Historical Society, to Portland Trails.
Yeah. What do you think that the outdoors, the open spaces, either the parks or the trails or all of it, how does that enrich your life personally? Like, what would you say about that?
Um, it it's the ultimate way of finding beauty around us. I mean, there's nothing more beautiful than being out in nature. There's nothing that's going to sort of calm the soul better than being out in nature. I have lived in cities my entire life, with Portland being the smallest city I've ever lived in. And just last year, my husband and I left Portland, and we now truly live out in the country, which is a completely new experience for me. And I absolutely love it. Just to be that much more within the natural world.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Have
there's
you
nothing
noticed
like it.
Have you noticed a change or an evolution in your experience of parks as you've gotten older and lived in different cities? Do you think we use parks differently? Do you think the demands or the challenges of city parks are changing, or have they always been the same over the years?
I think people seek them out for the same reasons, to catch their breath a little bit, especially the city parks, to be able to catch their breath, even if you're in the middle of Manhattan, to be able to go to Central Park, you can just leave the world behind for the day. And that's so important. We certainly saw a renewed appreciation for parks during the pandemic, when people were thrown out of their regular routine, and the early days of the pandemic, where you really couldn't have personal interaction with folks, especially not inside. We saw park use in Portland just explode, and it happened all across the country, and it happened in national parks, and it happened in small local parks. And I think it was because that was a place where you could actually interact with people still. And because people just needed the solace of sitting under a tree, that sort of comfort.
Yeah. Yeah. What is it that in addition to sitting under the tree and enjoying the parks that you work as well to preserve and to revive, what is it that brings you that energizes and nourishes you in your life, Nan? If listeners are curious to know.
Well, I think physical health and exercise is very important to me, and knowing that you can't get outside unless you can't get healthy outdoor exercise unless you have a place to do it. So that really drives me, helping people have a place to go for a walk, have a place for their kids to play. That really is one of the things that drives me the most. is seeing people out in a park, teaching their kids to ride a bike. You know, that's just really what my passion, and that's what drives what I do.
I'm hearing a strong element of service as a personal value to you, that you're motivated by being of service to others.
Yeah, I think that's true. I've worked in nonprofits my whole life, which just seems like a great way to have a career while being of service every day.
What would you say to those listeners who would think, oh, I love the parks, I love trees, I love being out in nature, but oh, I know that working in an organization requires so many meetings and so much, so much, fundraising and friend raising. How do you balance that in your role?
Um, I think for me, that's part of what I'm good at. I think I'm a good administrator and a good manager of projects. So, and even the fundraising, it's actually very satisfying to raise money, because you're not going to get to that end product. You're not going to be able to acquire that land or build that playground without raising the money. So it's very satisfying to be able to do that. So I don't mind it at all. But there are a lot of careers in the outdoors that don't involve quite as much administration. I know my friends at the Portland Parks and Rec office have plenty of jobs for park rangers, and they're looking for people. And these are the jobs where people are out in the parks every day, making sure that they're in good maintenance and good repair. So, boy, that's something I never would have considered when I was, a young teen or something. It didn't occur to me. So we're that's one of the things the Parks Conservancy is trying to do, is spread that word that there are jobs in parks and recreation that anybody can pursue.
Yeah, and I'll be sure to include those links in this program if anyone wants to click through and see what our current openings.
Yeah.
That's a great idea. I'm wondering, in terms of one of the themes of the Current is about our creative pursuits and how we are creative beings by nature. I know a lot of times people think, oh, that's a category for artists, for creative writers, and oh, I'm not creative personally, but I'm someone who believes that we're all creative, and there's so many different ways to express that and plug into our innate creativity as people. What comes to mind when for you personally, when I ask you, how do you express your creativity, Nan?
I'd say a couple of different ways. My husband and I are fixing up an old farmhouse. So that's a creative endeavor every day. Stripping out the old wallpaper and deciding what to do instead. And just constantly painting and working in the gardens and all of the whole 9 yards of fixing up a beautiful old home. I think that's a very nice creative endeavor for me. That fills a lot of that. And then personally, I've always been a knitter. I've always been a sewer. Those are the things that sort of keep me sane when I'm home in the evenings and I need something to be fiddling with or something to help me relax. It's those kind of creative endeavors that actually help me relax.
Nice. So really tactile, working with your hands. There's something really soothing about that.
Yeah.
Beautiful. And I'm curious, when you're, especially during these recent years when we have been more isolated, and maybe there's, we all have to be mindful of our mental and our spiritual health. Are we tending to ourselves and to our spirits? I wonder if there's sources that inspire you, whether they're books or podcasts or even places you go. I mean, we've talked about the parks as one of them, but I wonder if there's any that you haven't mentioned already in our short time together that you might mention.
I'd have to say, in general, I think the pandemic has been good for my spiritual side because there are less distractions and other things going on. So in some ways, I've benefited from that, of being able to focus more within. In terms of my favorite parks for that kind of, as busy as the Eastern Prom Park can be, the view of the ocean that you get there is just something so special and so awe-inspiring that really never gets old, and is always a wonderful source to sort of put things in perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I wonder, for listeners who are, hearing you talk about the Portland Parks Conservancy, hearing you talk about the ways in which you express your creativity and how you've come to do the work you did, from a historical side of things. What advice or what suggestions would you have for someone who maybe is looking to change careers, or to begin a career in a related or similar field? What might you offer them as a next step, or a question to reflect on for themselves?
Yeah. Well, I'd say a next step would be let your imagination run wild onto what you might want to do, what you think you might want to do, and then call some folks who are doing that and see if they'll sit down and talk to you and talk about how you could get there, what path they took. I get those kind of calls relatively frequently, and I'm always happy to chat with people. I really enjoy meeting people and sharing some guidance on how they might start a career in the nonprofits or in the environmental field or that kind of thing. And I think many professionals do welcome that. So I'd say don't be shy, but reach out and talk to people who are doing it.
And is the best way to contact you through the contact page on your organization's website?
Yep, that comes right to me.
Great. We'll be sure to put that in the links as well. Nan, as we bring our time to a close, I'm wondering if there's anything that you haven't had the chance to say or express that you'd like to say to listeners, whether it's how to stay sane and resilient in this world.
I don't know that I have all the answers there.
No.
I guess, as I was saying, just getting outside, going for a walk, taking a breath. It doesn't even have to be a long walk. I mean, it doesn't have to be some major hike, but getting out and doing a 10-minute loop somewhere and just listening to the trees for a few minutes and soaking in a little sunshine. I do that and it completely changes my day, no matter what kind of stress I'm under.
Yeah, I'm reminded of, we've done some NIA movement together as a NIA teacher, just how moving the body, move a muscle, change a thought, can really help shift our perspective and just lighten our mood and spark a new energy. And then when we go back inside and, see the same challenge, we have it's as if we're looking with new eyes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely agree. Yes.
Yeah, it's been wonderful talking with you today on The Current, Nan. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to be with us. And be sure to reach out to Nan through the Portland Parks Conservancy website link, which is you'll find below. And thank you again. What a pleasure. Keep doing the great work you're doing. And thank you for being on The Current.
Well, thank you so much, Erin.